550-2310. The number again, it is +251-94-550-2310. You may also choose to join us using the Zoom platform, either live or through the question and answer section. So my name is Wayne Musabayana. I'm Head of Communication at the African Union Commission, and I now hand you over to Dr. John for his usual brief. Dr. John, it's over to you.
Thank you, Wayne, and it's good to be with you again this week. And my apologies for last week that because of the travel, we couldn't respect our usual Thursday rendezvous. So a very warm greetings from Addis Ababa and greetings to everyone who has joined the platform. I would, as always, do three things: share with you the epidemiological situation, and then discuss what we are doing as Africa CDC to support member states, and then conclude with the vaccination situation. So let's start with the epidemiological situation. As of today, October 7, a total of over 8.3 million COVID cases has been reported across all 55 member states. And this accounts for 3.5% of the overall total globally. A total of 213,000 deaths have unfortunately occurred amongst all 55 member states, with a case fatality rate of 2.5%. And that number of deaths represents a 4.4% of the overall global deaths we have recorded since the beginning of this pandemic. 80% of our member states, that is 80% of the 55 member states, have now experienced a third wave. And as I will explain subsequently, we are very pleased to see that countries are now coming down nicely with respect to bending the curve from the peak of where we were. And unfortunately, 80% of those countries, that is 35 countries, actually experienced a very severe third wave. And the definition, as I've used previously in this setting, is where the peak is is higher than the peak of the previous wave. 7 countries, and I'll list them, are now experiencing the fourth wave. And these countries include Algeria, Benin, Egypt, Kenya, Mauritius, Somalia, and Tunisia. Since the last time we briefed, no additional country has joined the series of countries experiencing the fourth wave. In terms of variants, 45 countries are now reporting the Alpha variant, 39 countries are reporting the Beta variant, and 40 countries are now reporting the Delta variant. So if we should always remember that these are not like mutually exclusive. So in some countries, you actually see all 3 variants circulating. So it is very important to put that in the context there. So the Delta variant, if you just focus on the Delta for 1 second, the 40 countries out of 55 means that a vast majority of our countries now have the variant, the Delta variant, which comes with its own unique features in terms of the speed at which it transmits and circulate. So let us now look at the trends. As we always do, we look at the 1 week trend and then compare that with the last 4 weeks. So let's start with the last week, which is the week between September 27 and October 3rd. During that time frame, 67,000 new cases of COVID-19 were reported across all 55 member states. And this represents a 13% decrease from the previous week. We are very encouraged with that. If you now look at the 5 countries that are reporting the highest daily incident per million population, I deliberately want to focus on the per million population so that we standardize and normalize for that. We have Seychelles, Lesotho, Sao Tome and Principe, Botswana, and Gabon. So you see that if you normalize by population, it gives you a very different trend. But if you go with the absolute numbers, then that trend changes. And you have South Africa, Ethiopia, Morocco, Egypt, and Libya coming top. So let us now look at the deaths. Between that same period, that is the period between September 27 and October 3rd, we recorded 2,500 new deaths across the continent, compared with 2,600 from the previous week. This represents a 5% decrease in number of new deaths over the last week. Now, in terms of the 4 weeks, if you look at the stretch a little bit to the last 4 weeks and cover the period between the 6th of September and the 3rd of October, we see the following trends: that overall there have been 20% average decrease, 20% average decrease in new cases reported across the continent. And the breakdown by region is as follows: 31% average increase in Central Africa region, 25% decrease in West Africa, 24% decrease in Southern Africa, 22% decrease in Northern Africa, and 4% decrease in East Africa. In terms of new deaths, we have recorded as a continent a 13% average decrease in the number of new deaths. And the following are the breakdown by the most populous countries in Africa: 44% average increase in Egypt, 28% average increase in Ethiopia, 2% average increase in Nigeria, 20% average decrease in South Africa, 18% average decrease in DRC, and 1% average decrease in Kenya. In terms of testing as a continent, we have now cumulatively conducted 73 million tests, 73 million tests, with 1 million of those tests conducted last week alone. However, this represents a slight decrease of 14% compared to the previous week, where we tested as a continent 1.2 million tests. The case positivity rate continues to remain high, an average of about 11%. And the test per case ratio has now decreased to 8.8. You remember, our target is to make sure that countries conduct about 10 tests per case. So I think that is not very encouraging. So Africa CDC continues to work with several member states to support them in their vaccination, rollout of the vaccination program as part of the Saving Lives and Saving Livelihoods initiative. And we have people, staff in several countries, including in South Sudan, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, supporting countries there to roll out the vaccines. So that is a nice segue for us to get into the vaccine discussion. So as a continent, today we have a total of 200 million doses of vaccines that have been supplied to 53 member states, 200 million doses of vaccines. Of that number, 156 million COVID vaccine doses have been administered, which correspond to about 76.77% of the total supply available used. So that is very encouraging. Having at least 76% of our vaccines fully used is a good sign. Now, if you look at the people that have been fully vaccinated, that is the definition of fully vaccination is those who have received their 2 doses of vaccines, if it requires 2 doses, or a 1 single dose of Johnson & Johnson. In records shows that 4.57% of the population has been fully vaccinated. Some countries are making very good progress in terms of advancing the population that is fully vaccinated. Morocco now is reporting about 53% of its eligible population fully vaccinated. South Africa is making very good, remarkable speed there with about 16% vaccinated. Egypt, 6%. Algeria, 9% fully vaccinated, and Tunisia, about 26% fully vaccinated. So let me just conclude with the deliveries that AVAT, which is the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, is making. As you will recall, that process is picking up steam. When we started with 4.4 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccines delivered to 26 member states through August of this month. And the next series of delivery will start very, very soon, hopefully by the mid of this month, which is actually around the 15th of October. You see a series of other countries, and the next wave of, or we call it the second round of the distribution, will begin. So thank you, Wayne, and I look forward to having a very fruitful conversation with everybody.
Thank you very much, John, for that briefing. And it's good to hear that marked decreases have been noted across the continent. Hopefully, we'll not be seeing another increase as we head into the festive season coming up in a few months. So we are now going on to our question and answer section. And the first person that we are going to be calling upon is our colleague, Paul Adepoju. Paul, good morning. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. So I have a couple of questions for Dr. John. The most recent being his comment on yesterday's decision of the WHO to recommend the malaria vaccine for children. And considering that this is also recommended for children, we also recently heard about an effective Ebola vaccine for children. So I want to know what his thoughts regarding revising African countries' routine immunization programs. What is the quickest way to get these vaccines to needed children? And the issue of costs, how will African countries be able to afford these, the cost of procuring these additional vaccines? I also want to know whether there is any update on expanding COVID testing in Africa, especially looking at antigen-based tests. And the last question I have is there any latest on the decision of the UK government regarding the status and recognition of vaccinations that happened in African countries to ease traveling for Africans coming to the UK? Thank you.
So thank you so much, Paul, and thank you also for a very good commentary in the Lancet, I believe last week. Let me just say this, that the news yesterday of a successful malaria vaccine is a game changer, and I think must be celebrated as such. And as you know, Paul, malaria is one of the biggest killers on the continent. A combination of malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV account for very easily 1 million deaths a year in Africa. And if you look at just the malaria piece, most of the deaths really occur among younger children in Africa. So having a vaccine that shows that level of effectiveness or efficacy in preventing severe illness and death in children is remarkable. I think it must be celebrated as a significant breakthrough in the last 100 years that we have lived with malaria on the continent and other places. Malaria is a uniquely difficult parasite to fight because of the way it keeps evading the immune system, and the way that the different forms that the immune system needs to fight with. I mean, even those living in endemic area, you need to be exposed multiple times to actually get a certain threshold of what I call protection there. So that is extremely good news to celebrate. And I hope that that development means that going forward, the knowledge acquired through that vaccine will actually enable researchers to build on that and develop even better effective vaccines. I would like to, before I address your question on immunization, I really pose to congratulate the countries that in Africa, i.e. Malawi, Kenya, and Ghana, that took part in the vaccine clinical trials for the malaria vaccine. And it really shows African leadership and a can-do attitude to resolving and bringing solutions to some of our health problems. That is what we mean by a new public health order in Africa, where we can take the health security and ownership of our own health issues and address them. In terms of immunization, I think we need to see that dosing, because again, this is a vaccine that requires about 4 shots. And it will be my first reflection without going into details, planning with the people who do vaccination for a living, will be that to try to incorporate those into the childhood immunization program. I think that will be one way of looking at that. But again, I will leave that up to the experts in that area. Another thing will be given that the life-saving options that the vaccine provide to really look at develop immunization, special immunization programs for that particular vaccine for most African countries. In terms of cost, I think it has to be a combination of countries buying the vaccines, and also the global multilateralism through Gavi buying the vaccines, and bilateral efforts there. I think a combination of these three options will enable countries, hopefully, to get the vaccines. Antigen testing in Africa, it is becoming clear that we have to have a position, a public health position on testing with antigen tests on the continent, and even the recognition of that test for border crossing. We have so far focused on a PCR test for airport travel. There's a lot of movement across the border, which is the land borders, that will require that we take a look at antigen testing, and this is being discussed already at Africa CDC. And lastly, your question about the UK government statute on the recognition of vaccines from Africa, that is an ongoing conversation. You saw a statement we put out, and you also I've also received a note verbal from the embassy of the UK, and stating clearly that they will be looking into this further, and especially looking at, I think the 7th, today was the day they have stated that they will be actually looking into that decision and possibly thinking of revising. I will be meeting with the UK Minister for Africa today evening, and that will be a top issue to be discussed. And if you read my communique, it was really offering an opportunity for us to sit down and mutually agree on how to move the process forward journey, so that decisions are not made in certain capitals that have consequences in Africa as a whole. So I really hope that this today's discussion by the UK Minister of Africa will provide an opportunity for that dialogue to happen.
Thank you very much, John, for that response. So we now say good morning to Sarah Jerving. And Sarah, I believe that you are with DEVEX. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you so much. So you said that AVAT delivered 4.4 million doses by the end of August. From what I recall, the goal was to deliver 6.4 million doses by the end of September. Has AVAT missed its first target? And if so, why? Thank you.
So I cannot, Sarah, give you the exact numbers there, but we will give you, I was just referring to the numbers that have been distributed in Africa. Remember, AVAT also distributed vaccines to the Caribbean countries. I didn't add up those numbers. But if you are interested, I will be very pleased to send you by email the exact number of the distribution since including the doses that went to the Caribbean.
Thank you. It's time to say hello to Maggie Fick. Maggie, I think that you're with Reuters. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, that's correct. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you very well. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Just to ask in a bit more detail about financing for the first ever malaria vaccine. Dr. Nkengasong, is there anything you could say about the priority of the global donors that you mentioned, such as Gavi, to prioritize funding so that this vaccine can get in the arms of children in Africa amid competing priorities for funding with the COVID pandemic? I also wanted to ask if the Africa CDC would like to see other malaria vaccine candidates listed for emergency use in Africa, like the one being developed by the Oxford University researchers. And finally, could we ask for a comment on the news from Moderna this morning that they will set up a factory in Africa? I guess it's a long-term positive thing. Does it move the needle at all for now. Do you have any comment on which countries would want it? Is it a step in the right direction, or should local companies be building such a factory? And that's it. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Maggie. I think given the public health, we are in public health here, and malaria, as you've always heard me stated, is a major killer in Africa. So at the end of this year, it is likely that malaria alone would have killed many more people, especially in children in Africa than COVID. So we really need to not, it shouldn't be a zero-sum game where we fund COVID vaccines and neglect malaria vaccines. It should be a collective where we look at that in a holistic way and look at financing for her. That is why the kind of efforts that President Kagame is leading, which is domestic financing, or call it African financing, is so important, so that the continent does not just rely on donors to finance this kind of vaccines, but they should start themselves financing that. So we will be engaging with Gavi to understand and WHO in the coming days to understand, first of all, the availability of these vaccines, because there's also a need to be sure that there's access to the vaccines and availability. And then once we have that, to understand from WHO and Gavi how we can have dialogues, begin to have national dialogues with the convening of the AU or the Africa CDC to understand how those vaccines can truly be distributed in a timely manner. With the news with Moderna, to be quite honest, I haven't seen that news already. I think as I move into this press conference, some of your colleagues were texting me to comment on that, but I haven't seen that. I'll be, once I look at that, I believe it's a press release. I haven't seen it. Then I will be a better place to comment. But all what we do as Africa CDC is to urge the manufacturers to work with us very closely. Remember, we have the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, PAM, which was set up and launched by the head of states, and we continue to work in that framework so that it is better coordinated in a way that we look at the entire ecosystem of vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And you are absolutely right that vaccine manufacturing is very, very much welcome news. It is a news or efforts that will address our medium-term to long-term needs. It doesn't necessarily solve our problems today. The problems we have to solve today is access, a quick access to vaccines, redistribution of vaccines, making sure that certain licenses are provided so that manufacturing can start regionally, like the Aspen group in South Africa, enabling them to produce more so that the Johnson & Johnson doses can be made more available. But again, without reading the communique from Moderna, we welcome any news to join us in the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing.
Thank you. Just one quick follow-up. Could I have one follow-up?
Just one, please, Maggie.
Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to confirm that Moderna, it seems to me that Moderna has not communicated directly with Africa CDC about this plan for the factory. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of personally as the director of Africa CDC, but it's also not excluded that they have talked to my other staff that they have not vetted that information to me, but I have not personally seen any communications from Moderna.
All right, thank you. We move on. And this time it's hello to Chinedu Asadu, who is with the Associated Press. And Chinedu says, I remember that the African Union was offered 300 million doses of the Sputnik vaccine by Russia. How many doses have arrived so far, and how many people have been vaccinated with those doses? And also, are there any concerns about the Sputnik vaccine and whether health officials can actually rely on receiving shipments of that vaccine on time? So that was the first batch of questions, sub-questions under one question. Then secondly, he says, what specific changes does the Africa CDC director hope that the newly recommended malaria vaccine would bring to the continent, considering its malaria burden?
So with regards to the Sputnik vaccine, as we indicated last year, that they were willing to put it on the platform Okay, let me just make sure that I distinguish between what Harvard has secured and then what companies are ready to put on the Harvard platform. When we refer to the Johnson & Johnson 400 million doses of vaccines, there are vaccines that contracts have been signed. I have learned a lot in this process where you engage a company, then contracts are signed onto, and unless you sign that contract, you have no vaccines. So I think that is, you can count the 400 million doses of vaccines from Johnson & Johnson as vaccines in the pocket, which means you can rely on, they will be distributed progressively to next year. Now, when we engage with the Sputnik, we said, look, you have tell us how many vaccines you can put on the platform on your own, which means that there's no prepayment, okay, of the vaccines. When we sign these contracts with Johnson & Johnson, there's pre-financing from the Afro-Exim Bank. So that is not the case with the Sputnik vaccine. We said, look, your vaccine, we've seen the data and the efficacy data and the safety data, it looks good. Feel free to put that on the platform. They said we'll put 300 million doses there. Countries, as you know, are buying directly from the Sputnik producers. We have no control over that. We don't determine what countries do or do not do. What we do is we give overall guidance to countries. You also know that the Sputnik vaccine has not yet received the WHO emergency use authorization. So we continue to remain hopeful that they will give us, they will get that authorization so that, it puts everybody on a firm ground that WHO as the authoritative body in this space has given their stamp of approval there. So I'll leave it at that. So that is what, we know so far with that vaccine. With regards to the malaria situation, is, as you can imagine, is going to dramatically change the way we fight the malaria endemic disease. If vaccines, they become accessible, because I still don't know yet the cost of the vaccines and how quickly they can be scaled up, okay, so that you can factor that into your vaccine immunization programs. Remember, this is what WHO announced was the outcome of clinical trials that were done in 3 countries, Malawi, Kenya, and Ghana. We now need to see that massive production have occurred. And once that happens, then we will be convening meetings with member states and, of course, together with WHO to look at the vaccination program for that vaccine. So for now, it's still too early to state if and how that vaccine will be used. To state how the vaccine will be used, not if. If it's available, we'll use it. But how do you use it is still lend itself for discussion.
Thank you very much, John. We go over to Nairobi, Kenya, and say good morning to Leon Lidigu, who is with the Daily Nation. Leon, you want to ask your question live. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Dr. Nkengasong. I have 3 questions. Number 1, there's a lot of fear and speculation concerning expectant mothers, and I've spoken to some of them, and they tell me that they are not taking the vaccine because, number 1, their husbands are barring them from taking the vaccines for fear it might harm the baby. And number 2, they're just generally afraid. So I would want to know which strategies are we using to ensure that the uptake in this group of pregnant mothers is much higher. And number 2, where are we with the intellectual property for manufacturing the vaccines for as we are thinking about manufacturing, because as Mr. Strive Masiyiwa indicated previously, we are having a lot of challenges there. Are we having more conversations, or what new decisions have been made? And also with the challenges that Aspen in South Africa has been facing as it struggles to ramp up their fill and finish approach. How many doses are we likely to see from them in the coming few days or weeks? And then finally, are there any plans to acquire the new Covaxin vaccine that is almost being approved by the WHO, as Bharat Biotech has indicated, and India? And then India said it will soon resume to vaccine exports. So how many doses are we likely to get from that end? Thank you.
So thank you. So many questions that let me try to take them as best as I can. The issue of here come again the issue of vaccine skepticism from parents or concerned people in the community. We just have to admit that vaccine behavior towards vaccine is an issue that has been there before. So I really want to be sure that everybody understands that it didn't start today. Vaccine hesitancy has been there. Those who have been involved in the polio vaccination programs will confirm that we always have had these issues there. It's not because there are these challenges that has ever stopped us from continuing public health work. So we just have to make sure that we use our community approaches and to increase the awareness of the vaccines and create guarantees. When you have a new product, it is expected that the community will be divided. As part of the community will be all outgoing and they want to get the vaccine. But part of the community will also be hesitant. But that hesitancy is not static. I mean, our own public health experience shows that it's always a tendency to move in the right direction. Once people are more engaged, you inform and educate the community with respect to the risks and benefits of the vaccine. So let's wait and see how this will happen. Anytime you introduce a change, they expect that there are other variables that you have to address in public health so that uptake can be facilitated. So with respect to the IP, I'm sure you're referring to IP more generally. And I think it's safe to say that their conversations are still going on across the board, not just for the malaria vaccine, but for other vaccines as a whole. How many more vaccines do we expect by the end of the year? As Harvard, we are expecting, again, the vaccine field is very slippery, but I always like to put out the numbers there. And if we don't get to those numbers, I will tell you that we didn't. Harvard is expecting that by December, we'll put out there almost about 35 million doses of vaccines. That is a single dose of Johnson & Johnson, meaning that it will be the equivalent of about 70 million doses of a double vaccine. So let's remain hopeful that this scenario would improve. That is the distribution and the production, the fill and finish from the Aspen group in South Africa will improve, and we continue to hope so. New vaccines, yes, the biotech vaccine, we remain optimistic that it will soon hit the market. And I think there are other vaccines in the pipeline that will probably also be being introduced in the market as soon as possible. We are very encouraged with the news that India have said they will be releasing vaccines. Just how many vaccines, we don't know. In terms of quantities, we don't know. But we have been ordered by President Cyril Ramaphosa as the COVID champion to go to India with the COVID envoy, Strive Masiwa, and some foreign ministers and ministers of health to continue to discuss with the leadership of India on the need to release sufficient quantities of vaccines for Africa, given that we are extremely lagging behind our vaccination targets. I just explained today that we've only vaccinated about 4.5% of the population. And if we have to get to at least 70%, the new target, then we have a long way. So that is really justify that why President Ramaphosa would, as the COVID champion for Africa, would consider it necessary to dispatch a delegation to go to India.
Thank you, John. Good morning to Sophie Mokwena from the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Sophie, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Dr. Nkengasong, you spoke about your meeting with the Minister of Africa, UK Minister of Africa today. There are reports that countries such as South Africa are likely to be removed from the red list today. Are you also expecting the same announcement? And then the other question, it is around the pharmaceutical companies around the world. The WHO did convene a special meeting with all stakeholders that will include your World Bank, IMF, the pharmaceutical companies around the world, and other institutions that are able to finance programs such as a fight against COVID-19. And the meeting was convened specifically to plead with pharmaceutical companies to release stock to Africa, what you are talking about, to have access. And they spoke about countries that are supposed to play their part in allowing the export. How far is that process of ensuring that major countries, particularly your developed countries, where you have these pharmaceutical companies, are able to allow the pharmaceutical companies to sell to poorer countries and developing countries? And then the last one is the issue of countries using all vaccines. It was a request from WHO that countries must buy vaccines that have been approved by WHO, and it looks like people are still relying heavily on Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. What are you doing about this issue? And perhaps an update in terms of vaccine uptake.
So, Sophie, let me start with the last question. As you know, we have a menu of vaccines out there. The question is access to those vaccines. Even if you have the money, I mean, can you access those vaccines, given that the manufacturing is capacity, global manufacturing is limited? We are not imposing Johnson & Johnson on any one country or any user. I've explained severally on this platform how and why we ended up with Johnson & Johnson. And that is also true for Pfizer. We have a menu of vaccines, the Sinopharm, the Sinovac, the AstraZeneca vaccines, and I believe Moderna. So if a country wants to buy those vaccines, they are absolutely free to do so. And they have all been qualified by or issued the emergency use authorization by the WHO. So we, I don't know if that was the question. So in terms of the access, the meeting that you described with WHO, World Bank, Pharmaceutical, I'm sure that list would probably, I wasn't part of that meeting, so I'm not privileged to the conversations and the deliberations there, but I'm sure the WTO, the World Trade Organization, would have been part of that meeting. And I think it is Dr. Ngozi's really championship and advocacy that is driving some of these things to happen, which is access to trade barriers and access to pharmaceutical and diagnostics there. So I'm not privileged to that conversation, so I cannot discuss it knowledgeably, unfortunately so. The UK list, this evening, as I indicated, I will be meeting with the Minister of Africa, and we'll be having hopefully an open discussion, and I'll be learning more from what their plans are and offering also to them what our thoughts are in terms of the need to sit down and harmonize our trusted travel or vaccine certificate recognition. And I'll be hearing from him also, or her as well, with respect to what if and when South Africa will be removed from the list, and other countries in Africa. So stay tuned for next week, whatever transpired. Hopefully next week, I will be in a position to share that with you.
All right, thank you very much. We now go over to Lindsay Chutel. Lindsay, please tell us the news agency that you're with, and then proceed with your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Lindsay Chutel. I'm with the New York Times. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Thank you. My question is, today Moderna announced that it would be building a factory in Africa, but it hasn't said exactly which country or given the timeline. I was wondering what the Africa CDC's response to this would be, and then also which country would you suggest Moderna build in? Thank you.
No, thank you. I think as I said earlier, in response to I think it was Maggie's question, asked that question initially, is that we don't know. I've not seen that press release, so it's very inappropriate to be commenting with specific on things that I have not seen. Now, I will answer that again, as I said earlier. We have a partnership for African vaccine manufacturing, which has a political backing, and our wish and hope is that Moderna works with that group. It's a group that looks at vaccine manufacturing in Africa from an ecosystem perspective, from the whole of Africa approach. We do not tell manufacturers where to go produce their vaccines. We bring countries together, and through that forum, they can bring countries together. And there are about 10 countries in Africa that have expressed an interest in vaccine manufacturing. We can actually bring them all together and put Moderna at the center of that, and they discuss and ask all the questions. That will really speak to the need to be transparent and also to be cooperative and also coordinate our efforts. So, and if we learn more, of course, we will let you know.
All right, thank you for that. We have a question that's coming in from Judith Apollo, and Judith is with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation in Nairobi. She says, my question is, should the government of Kenya buckle into public demands to reopen the economy now, and especially now that the positivity rate has dropped to below 5%?
So, Judith, that is a very good question. We are in a situation where countries have to balance between saving lives and saving livelihoods. And we as Africa CDC are saying that the way we managed the pandemic early on, with a series of severe lockdowns and then you release them, then you lock them down severely again, is over. We have to use what we call public health measures and social measures to control this together, which include testing, that is expanding the use of rapid antigen tests, rolling out vaccinations, enhanced surveillance, looking for hotspots and squashing them before they become produce a third wave or the fourth wave or fifth wave, and of course maintaining social distancing as much as possible. So I think that each time we impose a severe lockdown, as our friends from the economic side will tell us, they said at least a $30 billion loss in economy. And it's going to be difficult to be moving from one severe lockdown to another. But we can avoid those severe lockdowns, if we do those things that are just listed here. So that would be my response to that. But of course, these are general guidelines. Each country will have to adapt those guidelines in the context of the pandemic. And generalized lockdowns are also not encouraged. I mean, you should really be using data from your testing to inform what are called localized lockdowns, if you have to go down that way. Say, for example, if we're doing routine massive testing, antigen testing in some parts of Nairobi, and subsequently a month later you're doing the same survey and you see that the positivity rate is increasing there, you can actually enhance your public health measures around that community to bring it down to an acceptable level.
All right, thank you, John. We go over to Gemma, who is with the Media Hack, and she has come through our WhatsApp platform. And Gemma says, for the Africa CDC's plan to increase vaccination production to 60% by 2040, how many facilities will need to be developed or established for this to happen? And then she also asks if it is possible that existing pharmaceutical companies are expected to expand to meet this demand.
Yeah, I think the 60% target by the year 2040 is an ambitious target, but a very necessary target. And if we consider that as a continent, we import 99% of our vaccines, we have to really be very deliberate and in saying that that scenario doesn't guarantee our health security, and we would put extra efforts in shifting that paradigm. Now, as we speak, 10 countries have now shown up what I call raise their hands and say we are interested in vaccine manufacturing. That is very encouraging. I mean, if you remember when we had the summit, the vaccine summit on April 2nd and 3rd, we had about 5 countries that had traditionally been producing some types of vaccines. That was like, I think, Egypt, South Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, and Senegal. Now, a whole host of countries have expressed a strong interest. And that is why we are saying that the only mechanism to guide that process is through the coordination of the Africa CDC through the PAM, the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing there. So if we keep doing that, we can catalyze the space, look for appropriate partnerships, and advance the discussion on the process forward. In the coming weeks, we will be hosting a meeting with the entrepreneurs across the continent to expose to them the ecosystem of vaccine manufacturing and also discuss with them exactly what we are doing to engage partners so that the market can be shaped. There is absolutely no point thinking of vaccine manufacturing in Africa if the market will not be there. So we have to tackle the problems on both ends, from the demand side and the supply side. And that's exactly what we are doing through the PAM process.
All right, thank you. I see Sarah, your hand is still up. Do you have a second question? Sarah Jervin, do you have
I do, yes. Yes, thank you so much. So as a follow-up to my previous question, which was on the September targets for AVAT, you just said earlier that the end of year target for AVAT was 35 million. But in August, the CDC put out a press release saying the end of year target was 50 million. So has the AU decreased its end of year targets for AVAT from 50 million to 35 million? Thank you.
No, absolutely. I think that what we are, we've set as a target, and this is not just Africa CDC, but with WHO as well, we're saying we should strive to get to at least 35% or so of our population immunized by the end of the year. Shall we meet that target? I don't know. And that will require that we're counting all the vaccines, those from bilateral, those from the COVAX mechanisms, and vaccines from AVAT. And if you remember, we said, and that was not necessarily a target. I think it was a WHO target that said by September, they wanted most countries to get to 10% immunization. Did countries get to 10% immunization? No, I think some countries did, some did not. So we continue to see the projections that the evolution of the production from South Africa. Remember, we are all counting on for Aspen, the Aspen manufacturing in South Africa to be as effective as it can be, and or even do more. That is, increase its production rates there. So the numbers that we are projecting here are numbers that we are doing all kinds of calculations and projections to see exactly what it is. If there are more, we will tell you that we got more vaccines there. Remember, we have a contract that is has guaranteed that we should access up to about 400 million doses of vaccines. So I think so that we keep adjusting those numbers based on what we see in terms of the projections from that factory. If next week with Strive Masiwa and others, we get more information that the numbers will increase, we'll let you know that the numbers will increase. And if the factory is running into challenges, we'll let you know that, there will be decreases in the projection. The vaccine situation is very fluid, as you know, and you can't really have a full handle over on that, even if you have signed your contracts with them.
All right, thank you. We have a question that's coming in from Esther Nakazi, and Esther is a freelance journalist. She says, it is said that Burundi, which is one of the 2 countries in Africa not to be on the vaccinations map, recently received a donation of COVID-19 vaccines, but also that the population there is not interested in their uptake at all. So does Dr. John have any plans on what is happening there?
First of all, as we announced a few weeks ago, Burundi has officially engaged with COVAX and AVAT to get vaccines. I think that is very good news. And I'm not aware that they have received a shipment of vaccines. I think that is very, very, very encouraging. And if they have, we stand by to work with them. And excuse me, as a matter of fact, there's we have actually received a request from the country, from the Ministry of Health, to support them in their vaccination efforts. So we will do everything possible to not leave any country behind. And as we know more with the vaccines, in terms of what kind of vaccines and what quantities in Burundi, we will, of course, let you know.
All right, so thank you. Our time is almost up. But let me just give Maggie Frick the chance to ask one quick follow-up question. Maggie, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Sorry, going to my question. I wanted to ask about whether the Africa CDC is pushing the access to COVID-19 tools accelerator of COVAX to sign advanced purchase deals with Merck for this new pill, Molnupiravir, that could prevent hospitalization when you catch COVID. Does the Africa CDC fear there is another scramble underway for that drug, as happened with the vaccines, and that Africa could be left behind again? And do they want to act quickly to secure some of those doses?
As a matter of fact, we have, I'm part of the ACT Accelerator College Advisory Group or a committee, and we will be as vocal as you can imagine in those discussions so that we are not left behind. Are we concerned that as a continent, we will be left behind? Or if you look at the history of this, the commodities, when they have emerged, it's always been a challenge for the continent to access them at the same time with others. So, but we always remain hopeful that solidarity and cooperation will prevail. So this is a drug that looks like a potential game changer if you put it in the whole the toolkits for fighting COVID-19. That is the testing, the vaccines, and treatment. So this is again a situation where solidarity should actually prevail, and we should be having those drugs when they're available at almost the same time as other countries. During the third wave, Maggie, which spanned between June to August, about 80,000 people died in Africa just because of the severity of the third wave. We don't know how the fourth wave will look like. So having those drugs available and in the context of very limited vaccine and vaccinations across the continent, that could be potentially be an additional very potent tool to fight the pandemic.
All right, thank you very much, John. We've come to the end of our program, but before we close, if you could just give us your summary of the main highlights from today's briefing.
The main highlights, Winnie, is that the vaccination rate in Africa is still very low, at about 4.5% of the population has been fully vaccinated. We continue to make an appeal to the global community that enabling the continent to get vaccinated at scale and at speed is a way to ensure that the collective security of everybody. So there's no other message than that, because that is where we are today. I mean, discussions about vaccine manufacturing that will come in later doesn't solve the problem today. What solves a problem today is where and how do we get those vaccines in the arms of people as quickly as possible. I will repeat what I've said before just a few minutes ago, that during the third wave, about 80,000 people died in about 2.5 months. If we put that in the context of the cumulative number of people that have died in Africa, that is a total of about 211,000. It means about 40% of the deaths occurred just the last couple of months. And that speaks to, again, the why is that? Because of the limited access to vaccines on the continent. So we call on every partner, friends of Africa, that it is time to really translate pledges and translate those promises into action so that we can save many more lives in Africa.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. John Song, who is the Director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who gave us his briefing on the situation of COVID-19 in Africa, as well as took a number of questions, quite a lot of questions from colleagues in the media. And I want to thank you, colleagues in the media, and